Welcome to week 2. Quite a bit of reading this week. Quite a bit of reading in most weeks. Don't get bogged down. Chop it up into reasonable bites. Take it in a little at a time. And most importantly, look for those quotes and paraphrases that you're going to want to put into your discussion posts, including your initial post as well as your peer responses, and then sprinkle some of those throughout your writing assignments throughout the term. That's how you synthesize the reading with the experience you have, put those together to demonstrate your understanding. All right, I'm going to go through this pretty fast because I know people are busy and they don't want to sit here and listen to me drone on. But we got a lot to discuss, so I'll try to cover just some highlights, kind of cover the tops of those waves so that you can see and then get into that ocean and decide for yourself what's most important for you. All right, 3 chapters in our text, chapters 2, 3, and 4. First off, we start describing 4 models. These models will be very familiar to you if you study crisis communication for a while. The first is the 3-stage model. It's a theory of crisis communication first popularized by Timothy Coombs in 2012 and others. The second is Stephen Fink's 4-stage model of shock, defense, retreat, and acknowledgement. That'll come up again later. The third approach is Barry Turner's theory of failure in foresight. I like that term, failure of foresight. And then finally, the authors describe crisis and emergency risk communication model. If you're looking for a model that you can apply to your organization, that's one that I would recommend. So that's our text. A lot of other information in those 3 chapters. I'll let you read the details, but that's kind of the highlights. I want to spend a little bit more time kind of going over the articles this week, starting with Liu and Frostino. Their article is titled Beyond Image Repair, Suggestions for Crisis Communication Theory. They talk about social mediated crisis communication. Sometimes you'll see that SMCC. This model aims to explain and predict how publics transmit information, as well as how organizations may best communicate with publics during a crisis. One of the seminal communication theories that are out there, review it, see if maybe there's some information in there that you can apply to your own organization. These authors also discuss situational crisis communication theory, sometimes known as SCTT, and it's a clear example of how theory can primarily focus on organization-based outcomes, actions, as well as other basic concerns. All right, one of the other things that this article touches on just a little bit is social media. And although social media can be less effective in repairing images when it replicates strategies used via traditional media, social media can be effective if you use it properly. So the idea is that you can't just replicate what you're doing for traditional media or internal information or maybe community relations and then just put that out via social media. It's a different kind of animal. And so you've got to be more interactive. You've got to be more responsive. You need to engage in a conversation. And we talk more about that in another course about social media. All right, second article is Utz, Schultz, and Glocka, 2013. Their article is titled Crisis Communication Online, How Medium, Crisis Type, and Emotions Affected Public Relations in the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Disaster. Now, most of you will remember back in 2013 when a tsunami hit Japan and it negatively affected the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. So I'm not going to go into the details, but some of the highlights. They talked about how there are 900 million people using Facebook and more than 100 million tweets daily. This was in 2013. I figured since we're beyond 2013, I want to update that for you. So today, there are more than 2 billion active monthly users on Facebook and more than 500 million tweets every day. So those are some updated numbers for you. The point is that social media continues to grow, and it has to be part of your crisis communication plan. All right, The third article is Lou, Austin, and Jen. The article is titled How Publics Respond to Crisis Communication Strategies, the Interplay of Information, Form, and Source. This study empirically evaluates an emerging communication model. They title it the Social Mediated Crisis Communication Model, or SMCC. You heard about that in another article that we read this week. I would highlight or encourage you to look at Figure 1 on page 347. It kind of goes through that SMCC or the model pretty well, and so it kind of gives you a good overview of that model. The authors also discuss social networks and blogs that account for about 1 in every 4.5 minutes spent online worldwide. Online is where people get their information, and during crisis, even more people turn online. Think about yourself. When you hear about a crisis, chances are the first place you turn is online. First place you turn to is online, as opposed to tuning in to a radio, a newspaper, television, things of other media sources. All right. And then another article is Holtzhausen and Roberts. Their article is an investigation into the role of image repair theory in strategic conflict management. Basically what they did is a content analysis of news releases and reports following sexual assault reports at the Air Force Academy. They employed a theoretical framework during their content analysis, and they looked at how the image repair strategies were affected in the context of crisis communication. So some good information as they studied that crisis for the Air Force Academy. Some of the relevant findings that I pulled out of the article was a proactive approach is most effective, probably no surprise there, and also whether or not statements are actually true is often irrelevant, right? It's perception. What does the audience perceive to be true? And we'll learn more about this as we go through the term about how important it is to provide accurate and timely information all the time so that when there is a crisis, you've already built up that trust, and that perception will be to trust your organization. All right. Before I leave that article, I did find this interesting. There was one factor that could not be measured in this content analysis, and it shouldn't be ignored, and that's the reputation of the U.S. military. Since 1966, leaders in the military have consistently generated the most confidence among U.S. citizens. At the time, or in 2003 rather, 62% in the annual Harris poll had confidence in leaders of institutions in the military, and had a great deal of confidence in military leaders. The next highest was academia, which was 31%. So the reason that's important is that you can take this study, you can pull things out and try to apply it to your organization. Just know that it's not going to be a direct fit, right? Because of that high trust that's already in the military. And that's true of any study. You should look at the limitations of the findings or limitations of the studies to ensure that their findings can or cannot apply to your own organization. All right, the final article that I'll discuss is the Coombs 2015 article entitled Protecting Organizational Reputation During a Crisis, the Development and Application of Situational Crisis Communication Theory. Again, that is CCT. All right, it extracts key lessons from the crisis communication research to develop a set of guidelines that managers can use to inform their crisis communication efforts. This would be one of those articles that if I were advising a organization, I would highlight, maybe pull out some relevant information and use that as I develop the crisis communication plan. They talked about broadly having two strategies for crisis communication. First is managing information, and then secondly is managing meaning. In other words, what does that information mean? Not to you, not to the people in the organization, what does it mean to your audience, usually a member of the public? All right. In Table 1 in that article, you'll find an overview of crisis response strategy guidance. I think that might be helpful as you work on your own crisis communication plan. And then finally, they talk about this notion of stealing thunder in crisis communication, or stealing someone else's thunder. Now, as it applies to crisis communication, the most relevant thing for us is that you get the information out first. All right? So the information is going to most likely be known. The question is whether you're going to tell it or whether somebody else is going to tell it. If you tell it, you're stealing the thunder of someone else, right? And you are seen as more credible, especially if that information is bad news. It's always better to get that bad news out early. Just get it out. You tell it from your organization, you're seen as more credible as opposed to someone else bringing up a member of the public, a member of the media, things like that. Probably one of the most important lessons I've learned in dealing with multiple crises over about 2 decades of public affairs experience. All right, well, that's all for this week. As always, stay ahead with your assignments, stay engaged in the discussion boards, and most importantly, enjoy this time of learning.